Hello, and welcome to the Cottage Notebook podcast. I'm your host, Nadia, and if you like your craft podcast with a little bit of gardening and creativity on the side, then this podcast is for you. Coming up on today's show is a relaxed chat with the very talented Aoibhe. So make yourself comfortable, grab that project, make that cuppa, and enjoy some time for you. Hello, and welcome to the show. Season 2 of the podcast is partly sponsored by the wonderful Ellie and Ada. Ellie and Ada produce artisan yarns and products for your maker life. You can find out more from Laura over on ellieandada.com. Now, if you're a new listener, come on in and have a nosy around the blog, Ravelry and social media. And if you would like to get us know a little bit better or take part in any of our challenges or creative discussions, then pop on over to our Facebook group, which can be found on the Cottage Notebook Facebook page. For returning listeners, it's lovely to have you all back again and joining in with the show. I hope you have all been well during our little break from podcasting. The break from podcasting was very much needed so I could finish up with some of my actual work. So thank you for still listening and still subscribing to the show. If you do have time and you like the show, I would love it if you could pop over to iTunes and leave a review so that you can help this podcast reach even more craft-loving people. And if you like it, please share the podcast on whatever social media you use and let us know what you think. If you want to stay up to date with all things from the Cottage Notebook, then make sure you are signed up to the newsletter, which you can find on cottagenotebook.ie. Now, today's podcast is something that is very special to me. Aoibhe has been a long-standing craft friend of mine, and I absolutely have loved and enjoyed watching her grow as an Irish designer. Aoibhe is a very talented lady with over a decade as a professional crochet designer under her belt, and she has inspired a new generation to pick up a hook and try their hand at modern take on an age-old craft. I'm delighted to be able to share an insight into her life as an Irish crochet designer, and I really hope that you enjoy today's episode. So instead of me blathering on for another little bit, I will leave you with the wonderful Aoibhe. Good morning, Aoibhe, and thank you so much for coming to join us on the show. I'm delighted to have you here.
It's an absolute pleasure.
And today I thought that we could talk a little bit about your life as a crochet designer here in Ireland. And you previously did a written interview for me on the Cottage Notebook, which people can find if they run back. But I thought it would be lovely if you could come on the show and actually tell us it in your own words. And this is your 10th year as a crochet designer, which is an unbelievable, amazing achievement. So could you tell us when you decided that you wanted to be a crochet designer and then how it all came about?
Gosh, well, I'll start off with a small question, eh, Nadia?
Yeah.
It's sort of a bit of a winding story, really. I'm not quite sure where to start on that one. It all it all coalesced, I suppose I could say, around the time of the recession. I had been working professionally as a graphic designer for a couple of years in Dublin, and then the recession hit, and the builders lost their jobs, and then every single peripheral business lost their money as well. So as a designer of logos and business cards and that kind of stuff, my job ended up disappearing from under me, and I thought, oh God, what am I going to do now? And I fell back on the hobby that I had loved ever since I was a little girl, basically. And it sort of blossomed and bloomed from there, I suppose, to now 10 years later, as you can see, and I'm still doing it for some reason. They say insanity is something that you repeat over and over and over again, but I'm not sure if I'm crazy for crochet or if I'm a genius for crochet. Not entirely sure yet.
And you have achieved quite a lot because you've done both print and independent publishing. Did you start off with print and then move into independent? How did the journey start?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of the most sensible way to go, really. And again, as I'm working, I'm sort of feeling my way through it because there's no real how-to guide for any one designer who's an indie to kind of figure out how to do all this, So it's very much does this look like the path to take? Oh, sure, I'll give it a go and I can come back and try the other path if necessary. Sort of a system, really. It's very trial and error. But what I thought, at least to start with logically, would be to start off going to magazines and that kind of thing, because they had in-house editors and they had style guides and they had, ways that people understood how their patterns were written because they kept them consistent. So I thought, well, I'll start off there and see how that goes. And then when I get a bit of not a foot in the door necessarily, but a bit of experience behind me on how to explain patterns to people, then I can go sideways a little bit and go indie. So my first patterns were published in Inside Crochet over in the UK, and that was a huge boost as well, knowing that a magazine was happy to take my work and thought it had value enough to show people. I mean, there's a huge amount of confidence that you get from having a magazine go, oh yeah, we'll take that. Even if it's only for a few bob to start out with, it is as I say, a huge confidence boost. So having them behind me to start with was a huge boon for me, really. But after that, I found that the designs I wanted to make were less mainstream, and I didn't feel like they could be explained fully in the magazine or book format, really. You need the techniques that I tend to come up with tend to require a bit of explanation, and there's no room for that in print. And YouTube links are a very handy resource to add as well, to go, this is where the hook goes. Look, it's right in here. I can't write it in writing, but I can show you in video form. And again, you can't put a YouTube URL into a magazine and expect all and sundry to sit down in front of their computer and type it out. So I found that indie design, or at least designing in digital format, suited me better as I progressed. And that's sort of where I've settled since, and it's where I'm more comfortable, I think, because I can also ensure that any mistakes that may have gotten past the editing and testing process can get fixed, and I can send out updates on Ravelry, which I do occasionally. So I can sort of be sure that the patterns that people get, even if I designed them years and years ago, can be updated and corrected should a mistake happen. And I find that's a very important part of the process for me as well. If somebody's going to hand money over to me, I would like them to be able to trust me entirely, that the pattern, I've done all the work and it's just pleasure on their end, is the end goal, really, for me as far as pattern sales go.
And I love how digitally with pattern sales, that record is also online, so it's incredibly transparent. So especially when
Yeah.
a new person comes to find you, like, it's almost like your entire back catalog portfolio is online. They can see how many people have made each thing, where the problem points in the design would be, as in the difficulty points.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and especially because you have made Tunisian crochet kind of your speciality. It's what I would know you for, and it's the reason
Mm.
why I learned to crochet was because I met you all those years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
remember that. Yeah.
your very first collection for or legendary shawls collection, actually. And
Yeah.
Venus was the one that kind of introduced me, and I didn't take your advice. So for everybody listening, take Ava's advice. Start with packs. Um, so
I know Venus is a little tricky, but it's not too bad. Like,
it's not.
finding somebody diving in with Venus is, it's not the craziest. It's not like you tried Freya first or something like
Yeah,
that. It's not too bad.
but I turned around to you and said, I want to beat it. And you went, okay.
All right,
um,
we'll figure this out, you crazy person.
but Tunisian crochet, can I ask why you fell in love with that, and then why your designs moved more, like less from mainstream and more into Tunisian? Why is that your love?
Well, I don't know. Why do we love anything, really? It's the feeling we get, I particularly love Tunisian, I think, because of the restrictions inherent in the style of crochet. It's I always when I kind of, because I got asked this a fair bit, and I always go back to my art teacher in college, who said that a blank page is a terrifying thing. You don't know what, if you're told to make art, it's impossible to narrow it down to the thing you want to make. Every single type of paint and media is out there. Any subject you could go with, any sort of format, you could ignore the page entirely and go elsewhere. There's no restrictions whatsoever, and you kind of end up with this paralysis of choice as a result. But if you're told you have to convey an emotion using only things you find outside, suddenly you've got yourself, oh, okay, all right, I've got a theme I need to focus on. I've got some rules I need to follow. And then boom, before you know it, the ideas start flowing. So I find it's very similar with Tunisian, because it's a grid. it's almost entirely square. If you go 20 by 20 in Tunisian, you'll end up with an almost perfect square. So everything you add to disrupt that perfect grid really is something that needs to be negotiated with the mats involved, and that's the puzzle I think I love in it. The ebb and flow, the sort of waltz that you get when you're adding eyelets. Because when you do that, you need to add a yarn over, so you're going to need to take a stitch from somewhere else. And where do you take that stitch from? And what does that do to the fabric? And that kind of stuff. I live for the kind of the feel of the mats of the piece rather than the finished project. So when I'm working on something, if it feels good, I'll carry on doing that particular pattern. And then when I block it, it's a surprise to me as well, really, how it actually turns out. So it's a wonderful little buzz at the end going, oh, look, the mats is pretty, that kind of thing ends up happening as a result of that for me. So I do find that there's a lot of inspiration in the fact that you can't do anything with Tunisian. Whereas with mainstream crochet, we've seen people do cozies for military tanks, and we've seen, you look on any crafting forum and there's 100,000 different things that people have made, because crochet is so malleable and so versatile that there's no limit really to the shapes and the quantity and the size and everything you can get out of it. Whereas with Tunisian, there are a lot of rules and it's a lot of difficulties you encounter, but I think it's in those difficulties that you get the most creativity.
Yeah. I love the fabric that is produced with Tunisian crochet, because a lot of people from a distance, when they see your samples, when you do trunk shows and stuff like that, the very first question I used to be asked was, is this knitted? Because they're looking at the stitches kind of going, their brain almost can't compute the difference between the knitting crochet and then this beautiful thing that seems to be somewhere in the middle. Like, the fabric is light, it has amazing stitch definition, and it doesn't seem to matter the yarn choice either, because I've seen your shawls over the years progress through different yarn weights, and it's fabulous, and it adds such weight to a lace weight yarn as well, where it almost shines differently. It really, it's a beautiful thing to see. I should not talk about it.
No, please carry on. This is wonderful. Yeah, no, I love it. It's sort of, for me, it's a wonderful compromise between knitting and crochet, really, because it's, sure, you're using a crochet hook and you're basically using broken double crochet stitches for the most part, in Tunisian simple stitches, but it's using knitted lace techniques to a certain extent to create your eyelets, to create the flow of the fabric itself. And and again, the compromise between the yarn and the hook you use, it's much thinner yarn, much bigger hook, so you do end up with this fabric that looks dense but has wonderful drape to it. And it just, it's kind of, it's exciting, if I can be a total nerd about it. I get giddy when I get say new kind of hand dyed yarn, and I'm like, ooh, which hook will I pair with this, and see where we go from here. I love delving into a new project because I've a basic idea of how it'll turn out, but it's always something new. Every single yarn I use that I haven't used before adds a different feel to it or a different character to the finished shawl, So it's always fun to try a new hand-dyed yarn, for instance. I find that they work perfectly with Tunisian because of the way the colors get split up in the stitches themselves and the dance in there. It's always fun to start a new thing.
And your design style has definitely evolved over the years. It's becoming more and more defined. How would you describe your design style to people?
Well, to be honest with you, it's interesting to hear you say that you think it's evolved, because to me it just seems like pure chaos. I'm not quite sure. It's I haven't any sort of an intentional style that I'm honing, or I don't have a finished goal to get to or anything. And I look at my timeline and all I see are the initial ideas that I had for the shawls in question. It might be interesting if I put a curve on this particular piece, or I wonder what would happen if I did this in a lot of wedges and stuck them beside each other, or something like that. I don't really see a particular evolution, but maybe there is one. Maybe there's one I haven't noticed yet myself, and in 10, 15, 20 years I'll look back and go, oh yeah, oh look, I didn't realize I was doing that, But at the moment I think it's just enjoying the puzzle. So maybe the ideas I'm getting now are further along a particular line, You start off with the simple puzzles and then you work your way through. So maybe I'm just playing with the cryptic crosswords at this stage or something. I'm not entirely sure. But I do love shapes and I love fitting them together and seeing what shapes you get out of that. So it maybe that's just it. Maybe I'm just refining that particular love of jigsaws in a way in fabric. I'm not sure.
Well, I know that you have been looking at creative inspiration. Um, so can you give us an idea of where you get your creative inspiration from, and then we'll have a little look at creativity.
Well, yeah, it's funny for me really because having I don't know if you've heard of this condition or not, aphantasia. And it's only recently that this has come to my attention and it suddenly everything clicked into place and I realized, oh my God, that is kind of how my brain works. Aphantasia is something that's been discovered by a university over in the UK last year, and they're still doing studies and refining their definitions of it. But the basic idea here is that some people have an actual mind's eye, most people do, but some people don't have anything at all. They're sort of mind's eye blind in a way. And I feel like I might have that. I never have any images in my head. So as I was saying earlier, I can't visualize a finished shawl. I can't visualize a red apple in my head. I mean, there's literally nothing there. It's a dark room, no images whatsoever. So when I'm working on something, it it very much comes from the ebb and flow, as I say, of the stitches themselves. So I don't see a shape in nature and go, "Oh, that's a lovely leaf. I will imagine a shawl out of that shape." I don't get that kind of creative inspiration that a lot of people do. And honestly, it sounds so much easier than my process. So I'd really, really prefer not to have this thing. But for me, it is, I could get an idea for a shawl from rubbing my dog's head by the movement of my thumb in an arc on her head. And then suddenly I'm moving it back and forth going, oh, that's a wedge shape. Okay, what would happen if, and then I'm kind of scratching her behind her ear and I'm going, if I added eyelets there and if I flowed in this direction, what would that then do to the next step in the process? What shape would I need to fill in the gap that I've just made by stroking down her back? Or very strange things like that do happen all the time to me, or I could be cooking dinner and stirring a pot and going, oh, there's a nice, interesting spiral. I wonder what I could do with that shape, or that kind of stuff. So it comes from the oddest places. But I do find that for the most part, and my poor partner Dave will attest to this as well, in the middle of the night, if I'm half asleep or if we're just settling down for the night, I'll go, oh God, I think I have a shawl idea. And then the light will have to go on and the notebook will have to come out from the bedside locker and I'll have to do a quick scribble just so in the morning I remember whatever way the pillow was lying on my face and whatever shape came into mind as a result of that. It's all very abstract and it's kind of hard. I probably sound like a crazy person describing it, but that's usually what happens for me. It's in the twilight of sleep or in a moment where my brain isn't focusing on anything in particular. I'll get a little pop, and that little pop will be, here's a shape. What do we do with this? And from there, the shawls tend to billow outwards, I suppose, in a way.
And creativity is something that we both look at. I tend to look at what to do when creativity is no longer there when you reach for it. And I know that you look at it slightly differently. Can you expand a little bit on creativity, and because I know that you have been researching it, kind of.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I started researching it mostly because I lost it for a little while myself there. We went through a few pretty epically emotional months a few years ago, and as a result of that, I think my brain was just exhausted, and I wasn't getting to the spot where I was in the twilight. My brain was too preoccupied with worries and stress, and kind of the events of the days, and as a result of that, I just lost the ability to create entirely. And as a result of that, I suppose I got interested in, for my own sake, really, how do I get this back? Where did it go and where does it come from and how can I get there again? Just because, when your livelihood is dependent on coming up with ideas and you've no ideas, it's pretty scary. It's an uncomfortable place to be dwelling. Um, so I started researching it and started seeing how other people do it. And now I've completely forgotten your question. Sorry, what was it again?
No, because I was saying I look at creativity because it's very same story to you in that when your livelihood depends on creating things, it becomes more of a pressure and a more like paint by numbers as opposed to you being creatively inspired and then loving what you're creating. And it was exactly the same thing. It was like, how do we create something when the well is dry, basically.
Yeah, well, for me, I think I found you kind of just don't. You just have to wait for the monsoon to come back, really, you know. Um, as far as my way of thinking it is similar to, you know, the advice people give to writers when they get writer's block. You know, there's no, I think it was, who was it? Either Neil Gaiman or Stephen King or somebody like that said there's no such thing as writer's block. Just write something. It may not be good, but just write something, you know. So that's what I was doing at the time. I was just plugging away, and nothing was inspirational. Nothing was worth showing, you know. Um, I designed a few shawls during that time, but they were, you know, kind of just run of the mill, so nobody will ever see them. They're the shawls that nobody. I'll go to my grave with those patterns, really. You know, they're not getting out there. But just keep doing it. You know, whether you're inspired or not, the inspiration will come back, but it definitely will not come back if you stop. You know, that's it. But just, I suppose it's a kind of a compromise between not pushing yourself. Not everything has to be a masterpiece. And I find that in general, you know, and I think it's something I forgot during those particularly stressful months. You can't expect everything you make to be brilliant. And everything I make is not brilliant. I often will stop with a swatch and go, oh, yeah, no, that's not working. I don't know what I was thinking. And then that'll go back in the basket behind me and be forgotten for eons, you know. And I think when I was pushing for ideas, everything I did that wasn't a great idea felt like another failure. And I think I forgot that that's what the process is like. It's you chip away and you chip away and you don't always find the diamond, but you have to keep chipping away, you know. Um, so if anybody is having the worst time right now coming up with ideas, even if your ideas are just back and forth in stripes, just do that for a while and you may get something out of that. You know, it's just don't stop. That's all. Just don't stop.
And leading from creativity to legendary shawls, because I really want to talk about legendary shawls and legendary shawls too, because I'm so excited. Um, the Can you tell us the evolution, I guess, from legendary shawls one, with Venus and Dedanan, etc., into the second collection for legendary shawls?
Yeah, well, the first collection was made up of, yeah, again, as I say, my inspiration is sort of chaotic, really. You know, ooh, there's an idea, I'll do that. There's no real language or symphony to it whatsoever. There's no genuine progression between one to the other in complexity or inspiration or anything like that. But I just felt it was time to do another eight shawls, and that is basically what I am doing. It's very practical, I'm afraid. But Legendary Shawls 1 was a very exciting departure. Well, I should just call it Legendary Shawls, really. There's no number. But it was, yeah, it was very exciting. You know, people were discovering my patterns, and I had done a small book of 4 patterns beforehand that were very, very simple shawls, and that's still out there. Shawls for all. It's a good introduction to where my ideas for the lacier stuff came from, really, because you can see the basic playing with shapes that I did in there that then progressed on to other things later on. But Legendary Shawls 1 was me, I suppose, putting my flag down, really, you know, deciding that I was going to do this year-long project was a huge deal as a young indie designer, you know, just starting out, saying, okay, I am going to commit myself to 8 shawls. Oh, wow, what am I doing? I'm going to give this a go, you know. And then the feedback that I got was just so inspirational and so confidence building, I suppose, that I was able to work from there on further things. But the beauty of the Legendary Shawls process for me is that I'll come up with an idea, I'll write out the pattern, make the piece, get the photos, do all the stuff, obviously. But then I don't tend to go to an editor. I'll edit it myself. Because I've got the graphic design background, so all my layouts and everything are in house, which is super handy and cost saving. But what I'll actually do instead of going to an editor is that I will ask for a bunch of testers, and I'll get a collection of wonderfully helpful. I don't know, they're saints. I don't know how I would survive without them, to be honest, but I'll get a collection of people between people who have made my patterns before and know what they're expecting, and then total newbies. So I've got completely new eyes on it. And if across the board the pattern makes sense to them, I know I'm good, because it isn't a technique that a lot of people are familiar with. It's not your basic crochet. So the rules for how to write and how to describe and explain a pattern aren't necessarily set yet. So having a group of people who are willing to tell me where I have messed up is the greatest thing in the world. And at the start of a test, I'll always say, look, you can't knock my nose out of joint. You can't insult me. Tell me where it's terrible. If you're confused, don't be embarrassed. If you're confused, somebody else will be confused too. And I'd rather we sort this out now, so that the pattern will be, as I say, nice and easy to read later on. So going through that process and honing that process with Legendary Shawls was kind of a bit of a hell of a kind of a going through fire for me, really. It burned off all of the amateurness that I had left and left me with a system that does work and still works, which is very comforting as well, So now with Legendary Shawls 2, I have myself well polished and I'm working away, and I'm on shawl 5 now. I have that blocked and everything, and ready to be shown to the world after Maka has gotten through its process, but that'll be a little while yet to get to that.
It's one of the things that I've always thought about your patterns because, with knitwear design and tech editing, it's kind of, there's a system and it's in place and it works right across the board for everybody. But what you do is so unique, that obviously your testing process is a little bit longer. So it takes a little bit longer to get a very professional, well finished design to market. And you are kind of reliant on testers, and if any of you actually want to take part in any of Aoibhe's testing, she has a wonderful Ravelry group, which I will let Aoibhe tell you about.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, my Ravelry group is there. It's on Ravelry. Aoibhe Ní is the name of it, as you'd imagine. And if I do any tests, I do put up a notice in there first to say that I've got a pattern coming up. This is what it's like, and a link over to the testing pool, which is another Ravelry group there. So I always run my tests on the testing pool itself, so that I can get a nice wide variety of people. But I always warn my people on my Ravelry group first, so that they're aware of it. They get their shoe in the door nice and early. But yeah, I mean, the Ravelry group itself is fantastic as well. And there's some people on there that I appreciate no end, because they've done so many of my patterns that when somebody who's new comes on with a question, they're always in before I get a chance to answer it, helping them out. So it's, if you do get confused, if you get confused with any of my patterns, please do ask a question in there. And if I don't get to you straight away, you can be darn sure that somebody else will be able to help you out in the meantime. It's a great little active group, yeah.
And your followers are truly amazing. I don't think I've ever cried laughing so much in groups. But the other group of people who are truly amazing and supportive are your Patreon group.
Oh God, yes.
And Patreon, you're on Patreon maybe about a year now, is that right?
It's a little over a year, yeah. We're up to about I think it's the 16th, 17th month or thereabouts on Patreon. So it's a fair while now at this stage, and it has helped me through that horribly uninspired period and stuff. It really helped keep me above ground, really, on that, above water. Patreon itself is a fantastic idea. It's taking the whole ancient patrons and artists idea and it's bringing it into the modern era. So what I would do as a struggling artist would be to put up a Patreon page, and then people could come and pledge as little as $1 or as much as 20 on mine, or more if they want. But that they're my tiers on it, and it works very similar to the way, say, GoFundMe does, or that kind of thing. But it's a monthly stipend, really, more than anything, and it ensures that an artist or a musician or a writer or a creative person in general who's completely dependent on their creativity and people feeling that it's worth paying for, which isn't always the case, unfortunately. So people whose income may be very variable from month to month, depending on who likes their stuff or what they can produce, it gives a backbone really to your income, and it has proved to be absolutely invaluable for me. I had gone from needing to design and needing to get something out there every month or two, which is a breakneck speed, really, when you're doing all your own editing and all working with your testers and getting all your ducks in a row per pattern. I was doing that and feeling that the patterns I was producing had to go out. There was no choice. Quality control was lower on the list because rent was due, that kind of thing. And now I've actually gotten to a point where I can rely on my rent being paid thanks to Patreon. And as a result of that pressure being taken off, I can decide now whether or not a pattern is truly worth putting in the effort, or I'm finding with that stress removed, more of my patterns are worth putting the effort in. So it's this weird little cycle of, okay, I can breathe, because I can breathe, and now I can actually do more creative stuff. Whereas before it was, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I need to make something, you know. So with Patreon, especially recently with catching the flu and the snow over here and everything, it just interrupted my teaching schedule so badly that that I ended up quite in need of a few bob, as sometimes happens. And having Patreon there to save me really has been a huge blessing, really. So all of my Patreon people are little heroes as far as I'm concerned. They're all so important to me, and I tell them that all the time, but it's always nice to be able to vocalize it as well, you know. So thank you all, everybody on Patreon. You are wonderful, seriously.
And what I love about Patreon is that the money doesn't come out of your account until you, as the artist, actually produce something.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a monthly kind of stipend that just automatically leaves your account like a direct debit. It's actually the artist has made this thing solely for their Patreon customers. It's almost like this extra little treat of love.
Yeah.
And you do put an awful lot of effort into your videos. I've actually been blown away by some of your Patreon stuff.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad. It's lovely to hear.
It wasn't, I had this idea about Patreon because obviously I'd been looking at it from a podcast point of view, and then when you start realizing the opportunities that are there for artists like yourself, or people who do anime and that kind of thing, which I didn't even realize was an independent thing until Patreon, um, that the options for people to be able to support themselves while producing a body of work that they are known for. It's that bridge that allows you to create and create much better pieces than you would have been able to do alone. Um, I think it's one of these things. I've always been kind of dicey about Patreon, but when I get to talk to people like you and see some of the other truly great accounts on it, it's again, you're very much dependent on the person behind the Patreon account. Um, so as Ava was saying, even if you're unsure, take the $1 a month, try it out for 1 month, see if you like what that person is creating, and then you can decide to increase or decrease your or cancel.
Yeah, and like, yeah, there's no difficulty canceling. There's no difficulty with anything like that. There's no kind of, you won't get nagged, you know, by emails or anything like that. It's not difficult to leave, you know, which I think is an important thing to say to people when they're trying to commit to something. You know, it's you can pop in, you can pop out, you can decide if a certain month's gifts are, you know, something you're interested in, and then join again and leave again and all that sort of stuff. It's very easy to come and go, but yeah, and it is wonderful as well to see some of the feedback and to hear feedback on the Patreon gifts that I do produce every month. You know, the how-to videos I find are a wonderful thing to be able to hand to somebody, you know, to say, look, here is a dedicated video for the question you asked me last month. Here's me explaining it to you because you've asked me this, you know, or all the little crochet pattern gifts that I get to do, all the little gloves and all the household stuff, or the funny hats for kids or that kind of thing. I love being able to produce that stuff. That's play, you know, for me. So to be able to hand that over to somebody else as a thank you so much for, you know, your support. Here's a thing for you to play with. You know, I love the positivity that you can actually get out of that as well. You know, that's a lot of value to it too.
I'm gonna ask you a slightly difficult question now. The your designs are incredibly well suited to indie yarn dyers, like you said previously, just in our conversation. How do you choose which yarn and which dyer to work with when you're producing a collection?
Oh gosh. Well, again, it's sort of the feel, really. It's all instinct with me. I'm sorry I don't have a process anybody else can follow, really. It's just, if I like a yarn, I'll give it a go, really. You know, for legendary shawls, I only really had access to, you know, to Irish yarn shops and the few people that were available there. So I was able to meet a few of the yarns and then try them out. So Hedgehog Fibres was an early one I fell in love with, and I do tend to go back to them every couple of shawls and go, hey, it's me again, you know. And they're always very accommodating and they're always very enthusiastic, and they're wonderful people to work with, you know. So yeah, Hedgehog Fibres really is always a go-to as far as I'm concerned. I've never ever regretted using any of their yarn. It always turns out better than I was expecting. It's lovely stuff, and their colors are so inspiring. Um,
And
so
Bias are
they're
so
a
lovely.
definite. Oh God, yeah. I mean, they're all so lovely down there. It's lovely to have them on this island. I feel very proud
Yeah.
that yarn is being produced here. But as far as the others go, it's usually I'll either get contacted. That sometimes does happen, and it's very flattering when somebody says, "Hey, I've got yarn. Would you like it?" That's literally, I think, the reason I designed at the end of the day is to be offered yarn. you know. But sometimes it is, again, I'll meet it in a shop, or say if I'm at a yarn festival or something like that, I will drop by somebody's stand and will just instantly fall in love with something, some color or some quality of the yarn that they've produced. Just makes you go, oh, I know what I want to. I want to do. I want to play with that. I need to use this for something. I don't know what yet, but I need to use it for something. And that happened last year when I was at Hillview Fest over in Buckinghamshire. I was teaching a couple of classes at a absolutely wonderful little creativity festival over there in Buckinghamshire, glamping and all sorts, a whole weekend getting fed on stuff from the small holding right next door and everything. It was just absolutely idyllic. I know. I'm dying to go back there again this year. It was just incredibly inspirational. I cannot go on about it enough. But she produces her own yarn, so I got to meet that yarn over there. And now that's what I've actually used most recently to design shawl number 5 for Legendary Shawls 2. But I also met Kettle Yarn Company. I met Linda over there who does that, and she's over in the UK, and I got to meet some of her yarn. And I honestly, I must have looked like a pathetic little puppy who just fallen in love. I couldn't get away from her yarn. I couldn't draw myself away from that yarn. It was, the texture of it was just beckoning me really. So again, Nuada came out of that one. So that's the beautiful grey silver yarn I used for that one that we photographed down on your beach. But so really there's just a quality, and I do not know what it is. It's usually the look of the yarn and how the definition of it, I feel, would suit a particular project. So if the yarn pops, I know the stitches will pop. But I do try and avoid any colors that change too rapidly. So any hand-dyed yarns that go from one color to another too fast, I know will just look, it won't add anything to the lace. You won't be able to see the lace because the color will take over. So any colors that I do use tend to be very gradual and tend to just be semi-solids more than anything like that. But I do love working with a good semi-solid, and yeah, that's usually where what I'll be drawn to in any particular shop will be the semi-solids, lace weight, fingering weight yarns. With a bit of silk because they're great for blocking. But that's just technical.
It is. I have seen you fall in love with yarn, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
I just want to dive straight into it. It's just a
Yeah.
visceral reaction I get to it. It's
Yeah.
oh my God, I want to eat it.
It's
All I can do.
all I can really describe Ava with when she falls in love with yarn is it's suddenly in her hand and she thinks she's put it down and she's suddenly carrying it around, stroking it, and then kind of almost playing with it between your fingers. And even though you're not actively thinking about it, it's like your body's kind of almost ahead of you with trying to playing with it, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's like puppy to me. You can't
Yeah,
stop pick up a puppy. It's that
exactly.
kind of thing. It's oh my God, this is making me so happy. I don't want to put it down. You do. I definitely get that kind of an effect. Yeah.
There's lots of people who are listening who've going, yeah, I remember the time some yarn followed me home. um,
Yes. Yeah, we've all had that, I think. Yeah.
one of the great things about you is actually your teaching. You teach currently at the Constant Knitter, is that right?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. I've got 3 classes there on Thursdays. And if anybody's interested in that, please do let me know and I'll give you all the information. The 3 classes are like 2 hours long, and they're multi-level. So if you're a total beginner and you want to learn how to do a very simple stitch, I'm there and I can totally teach you that. But if you're looking to do something more complex, I'm absolutely there for that too. So I find there's a lovely mix in classes, especially when you get around 3, 4, or 5 people. And the classes don't tend to get much bigger than that, so everybody gets attention. But I'll be sitting there with a complete beginner and explaining how to make a slip knot even, or something basic before we've even dove into the actual crochet itself. And I'll have a crocheter who's been crocheting for 40 years and has just come to me to learn to Irish crochet lace, say, for instance, or heard about Tunisian and is interested in what this is all about. who will lean over and go, oh, that's a much better knot than the one I've been using all these years. So it's lovely to know that experience doesn't necessarily mean you've filled in all the gaps in your knowledge. And a complete beginner will quite often invent a stitch that, granted, is already there, but they don't know that, which is a very advanced technique. Like the number of times total beginners in my class invent Tunisian is just remarkable. They just forget to do the second part of a double crochet stitch and boom, you have Tunisian. It's amazing the inspiration and the creativity you can actually get from not knowing what you're doing, I suppose, really, more than anything. And being able to say that a few of my students over the years have then gone and started designing their own stuff is just something I'm hugely proud of. Or even just this week, one of my students came in and said, so you taught me a bit of Tunisian last week and we did some basic lace stuff, so I made this shawl. And like, I was flabbergasted. This woman's only just started doing Tunisian crochet, and she learned a basic eyelet, and then she came into me with this shawl she had designed using the technique in a way that I would never have considered. And I love that. That's, yeah, off you go. Brilliant. Carry on. Invent your own little branch of this. This is exciting. This is amazing to see. I gave you a basic idea. You ran with it. And now there's this whole different thing happening. I know. I'm just so, Leanne, I was just so proud of you. Seriously, it's amazing to see that happening. You hand somebody something that you think is one thing, and then they turn it around and make it something else. And it just goes to show how much there's left to discover with crochet. There's always something new.
And you also do specialist workshops as well, because I know you've done the specialist baby blanket with This Is Knit, and you also teach abroad as well. You've actually achieved so much. I find it hard to kind of fit it all into 40 minutes of a podcast. But you are also coming on board for Woolen this May, and you have 2 workshops. Can you tell us a little bit about both of those, please?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, and I'm so excited about Woolen as well. It's going to be such a new thing for Dublin as well, and getting to teach it at a festival in my own home city, I suppose, as well, is going to be brilliant. But my 2 workshops that I'm going to be doing, the first one is an intro to Tunisian crochet. So in that, you will be working through the basics as my patterns are written, as well as a couple of different eyelets patterns and that kind of stuff, to get people up to a point where my patterns won't seem maybe as scary, because they'll have all the terminology and all the techniques and things like that. So that'll be a great class to teach. I always love it, because even if you have crocheted, as I say, for 30, 40 years and you've never tried Tunisian, there's always that moment where the penny will drop and you'll go, oh my God, I get it. And I live for that moment in people. I love it. I want to start high-fiving everybody in the room when I see that happening. People going, oh, this is a way we can do a thing that I hadn't thought of before. And again, you don't know what'll come out of that. So that particular class is always, always great fun to teach. And I find that people, much like ducks to water, once you get past that what are we doing phase, it's just plain sailing, and it's just a pure pleasure to watch people learn. So that's one of the classes I'll be doing, that intro to Tunisian. But then I'm also branching out a little bit, and I'm doing a Tunisian jewelry class. So it's wire crochet, but with a Tunisian bent on it. And I see there's a photo of the necklace that I'm going to be teaching people how to do up on the Woolen account, I think, on Instagram today. So that's there, and I'm sure that'll be around in a few days as well. But the necklace itself is using Tunisian crochet and wire to make a very pretty little modern looking necklace. So we'll be doing that as well. Now the necklace itself is just the project for the class, but the techniques themselves can be used to create bracelets and earrings and hairbands and everything, really. It depends on how much wire you have after that. The technique itself is the same. It's just we'll only have time for the necklace in the class itself. But I'm really, really looking forward to that too, because it is a departure. It's the same techniques, but using an entirely different medium gives everything you do an entirely different feel. So it's a little bit exotic, I suppose, really. I'm very excited about that class too.
And do students need to have the wire before they come to class, or is that provided?
The materials are all provided. I'm bringing that just to ensure that everybody has the right wire, really. You don't want people coming and realizing that the wire they got was too thick and literally just won't work, or is too thin and will snap and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be coming with all the materials, the clasps for the back of the neck, the chains, everything, and the hooks themselves as well, because the wire is quite hard and harsh on your tools. And normally I use wooden hooks for everything I do, but there's no way I'm letting my wooden hooks near this wire whatsoever. So So it's going to be metal hooks, and then the wire itself will be provided and everything. So all my students for the jewelry class need to bring is themselves and a smile, really, and I'll have everything else ready for us there on the day.
And your classes are on Saturday and is it Sunday morning?
Yes, yes, they are. Yeah. So I'll have to be up early for them and everything. There's dedication in this.
I figured we're all just gonna sleep out at Elsa for one. um,
Probably not a bad idea. Yeah, I'll bring my pillows with me and snooze in the corner somewhere.
just find us rocking in the cloakroom. Um, if people would like to find out more about Woolen and Ava's classes, please do pop over to woolen.com and you can read even more about each of her individual classes, and the prices are available there. And it is possible for people to buy um, festival access tickets on top of your classes, and people do also get in extra early, so they have some extra early shopping time prior to the marketplace being open to the general public as well, which I think is lovely.
Bring big bags.
Big
Big
bags.
bags. Yes.
I know the lineup is it's amazing.
It is. I'm so excited. I can't wait to go around all the vendors myself actually, and meet some yarns that I might want to bring home,
I know.
That's always the best thing about these, is seeing stuff that you can't normally see in Dublin, because there'll be people coming in from all over. So getting to see all of these extra yarns that are new and exotic is going to be very exciting as well.
I have to ask this question because I always finish it. What is in the future for Ava?
Ooh, well, considering the chaotic way that I design, who on earth knows, really? I have plans and I have dreams and I have hopes really for the future. So I can certainly tell you that, but I don't necessarily have a particular timeline here. I hope to keep designing. Who knows? 20, 30, 40 years down the road, I really, because I get so much joy out of what I'm doing, I hope I'm still doing it in some form or another. I'd love to travel and teach more. But that's not viable at the moment. But hopefully in the coming years I'll do more festivals abroad and that kind of stuff as well. And I'd love to get something printed in actual tangible form. I'd love to have a book of my shawl patterns, some sort of compendium of all of those, all published somewhere in print would be wonderful too. But that's on the long finger for the next little while as well. Legendary Shawls 2 comes first, and then I can see about that afterwards. But keep doing what I'm doing, I think, really, and keep snuggling the dog, keep gardening, that sort of stuff. I don't ever want to be out the door with work. I don't think that suits me too much, but I love the idea of having an active creative life and meeting more creative people and getting inspiration and inspiring and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully this will continue for quite some time.
And Ava will be joining us again for a little project a little bit later on. So this isn't the last that you're going to be hearing from Ava on the show. And if you do want to find out more about Ava, you can click on over to the show notes as well. Everything will be there for you to find, and as well as links to Woolen, her classes, contact information so that you can join in some of Ava's classes as well. Are you doing any more events this year?
I am going to be over in Buckinghamshire at Hillview Farm, but I'm going to be doing that thing again. So I'll be off living in a yurt for a couple of days, glamping over in Buckinghamshire, which I'm going to try and drag you over to as well, by the way. And I would highly recommend everybody look it up. Hillview Farm in Buckinghamshire. It was marvelous last year, and it was her first year doing a large scale thing. So I can only imagine this year is going to be even bigger and better. But beyond that, no, I'm keeping it small. Just the two things this year. Swollen and in Hillview.
What month is Hillview happening?
That is, let me see, I've got my calendar right beside me here. That is the 3rd to the 5th of August. And I'm not entirely sure she's actually put up all the information, but she's booked me in, so I'll definitely be there anyway. I'm not sure what else is going on, but I'll be there, sitting happily in her field. But yeah, that's when that'll be.
That sounds awesome. Thank you so much for taking your time to record on the show. And for those of you listening, this is actually Easter Saturday, so this is right smack bang in the middle of holiday season. So thank you so much, Ava.
You are absolutely welcome. It was an absolute pleasure, Nadia.
No problem. Thank you. And I'm gonna leave you off to the outro and links to show notes. Thank you, Ava. Bye bye. Welcome back, and I really hope that you enjoyed today's chat with Ava. I'm sure that you can tell that I would love to spend another while chatting to Ava, and don't worry, she will be back on the show when that project's going to take a little bit. If you would like to have a look at legendary shawls, one of the things that I should mention is over on Aoibhe's Ravelry page, and all of the links are in today's show notes, so don't worry. You can pick up an individual shawl or the shawl collection for legendary shawls too at a discounted price at the moment. So if you pop on over to her Ravelry page, you can find out more details about that. And again, the links will be in today's show notes. You can find everything that you need to do related to today's show on cottagenotebook.ie/listen. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm your host Nadia, and this is Cottage Notebook Podcast. Grow, craft, love. Bye bye.